the one other logistical note is that one of our members a couple weeks ago, I think when we had one of the select board candidates, had mentioned that it would be nice if email addresses were shared so that the candidates, if they wanted to, could reach out directly to, just some of the members maybe that had asked questions or whatever for follow-up. I don't want to make that blanket decision for everybody on the call, but I guess what I'd like to ask is for anybody that would like to share their email addresses with Cathi and Elise, just put them in the chat. And then after our session, we'll be sending that chat out along with our kind of recap of the session.
Would it be helpful if we put our email addresses in there as well?
It would definitely be helpful.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, and actually, I found this for the select board candidates that we had. If you have a website or a Facebook group or any way that people can find out more, put that in. And what we do is, I think we'll send it to the group. We also will put it in the description for the YouTube channel if anybody happens across the YouTube channel.
Yeah. That would be terrific. And I guess the one remaining thing is if you can leave yourselves on mute until such time as you want to ask a question, that would be great. So with all of that preamble, Cathi, can I ask you to go first, if that's all right?
Could I just ask, maybe Doug, you or Cathi could explain what we have, is it 5 candidates for 3
Yes.
school committee, just the overall landscape?
Yeah, yeah, that's
Happy
right.
to.
5 candidates for 3 committee slots. We're having Cathi and Elise this morning. We've got Henry and Julie next week. We have yet to make contact with Kathleen. So if anybody knows,
she's on the Zoom here.
Oh, good. Oh, Kathleen. Oh, there you are. All right. Yeah. Excellent.
And
I
it
see
pops up.
Yeah, I see.
Sarah looks like she's, looking
good.
for land.
Yeah. So blinded otherwise.
Yeah, well, if you're available, Kathleen, next session, or if you're not, then I suppose we could divvy up, the time a little differently, and you can speak this morning as well.
No, I won't jump into here. I'm happy to chat next week.
Excellent, great. Well, good to see you. Okay, so, all right. Well, Cathi, let me turn it over to you.
Yeah. So there are 5 candidates running for 3 seats. The 3 incumbents are running. Those are Julie McDonough, Henry Helgland, and myself. And we have 2 new people challenging us, Elise Gorseth, who we're going to talk with, and Kate Flathers, who's here to view. The seats are 3-year terms on the school committee. I don't know if there's anything else in particular that you like me to address, but otherwise I'm going to just tell you about myself. My name is Cathi Collins, as I said. I am the current vice chair of the Natick School Committee. I have been involved in town issues and town politics for quite some time. In fact, Sarah and I served on a committee way back in 2004 or 5, somewhere in there. And we serve on another one at the moment. So things just kept coming around. I spent 12 years on the finance committee. 11 of those years, the last couple of years on the finance committee, I was the vice chair there, but 11 of those 12 years, I was the chair of the education and learning subcommittee in whatever form. It wasn't always called that, but and that subcommittee was responsible for looking at the budgets of the Natick Public Schools, Keefe Tech, and the 2 libraries. So I'm intimately familiar, or I was always intimately familiar with the school budget. And there is a 12-year limit. And when I got off, I decided that my skills best fit the school committee as it was made up, and a need that I saw there, because in the past, some school committee members didn't really understand what was in their budget. The then superintendent didn't push that, and I just found it difficult to understand why you would be responsible for a budget you didn't understand. So one of my goals when I got on the school committee was to help people better understand the budget and make it as transparent as possible, which we've worked on for 3 years. We have a new budget format. it's called a meritorious budget process. It's one that is developed by an outside group called the called the Association of School Business Officials International, ASBO. Things have become much more transparent, and we can talk about that later. More about me. I started my working career as a bank auditor. I finished that section as an audit manager. Then I went back to grad school and became marketing instructor as I pursued my doctorate, which I didn't end up finishing because of health issues, but I have all the coursework for it, including statistics, and I did a lot of marketing research. I taught marketing research a lot. So I've been involved in town politics, as I said, or town issues for a long time. I joined town meeting, I think, in 2005. I've been on numerous committees that were town meeting committees. I've also been representative to town side committees such as the Audit Advisory and the Financial Planning Committee from either the school committee or the Finance Committee's perspective. I've been the representative from both angles. I currently sit on, as I said, a land area makeup study committee with Sarah. I'm also the vice chair of the Town Meeting Practices and Rules Committee. And I think, fingers crossed, I think that we have a final draft of a revised town meeting member handbook, which we will present at town meeting this spring. On the school committee, as I said, the vice chair, I sit on all the negotiation teams. I sit on the policy subcommittee. I represent the school committee in a program called Influence 100, which is a program put on by the Department of Education, of Elementary and Secondary Education, and its goal is to mentor individuals in school districts that come from marginalized backgrounds and mentor them to be administrators and eventually school superintendents. So we had our first two from Natick graduate this past year, and we have another individual in there now. I guess we'll get to the rest of it as appropriate when somebody asks a question. But I'm going to stop here.
That's a nice overview and pretty impressive list of activities. Great. Okay. Well, Elise, would you like to introduce yourself then and kind of talk about?
Sure. Yeah. No, and thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. This is a group that I've heard about but haven't been able to join to date. So thank you. Yeah. So so my history. So I've lived in Natick for almost 8 years. Moved here with my family when our daughters were, I have triplet daughters who just turned 12. And when they were about to start preschool, we were outgrowing our house in Waltham and looking for a new place to live. And we're very happy that we were able to land in Natick. And I always tell everyone we lived in Waltham for 10 years. And when we left, there were still people on our street who we didn't know. And within months of moving to Natick, I feel like we know everybody on our street and they know us. And that is something that has been really wonderful about moving to Natick, is it feels like a true community. And so our daughters started at the preschool and are now in 6th grade. I became involved in various activities as soon as I could. I'm actually not a native-born American. I grew up in Canada, and I became an American citizen in 2017. And in December 2018, I pulled papers for town meeting, and I got elected to town meeting the following spring in March. And that was something that was really important to me because Natick felt like our home. And, you know, that saying about all politics being local is absolutely true. And when you are somebody who can't vote, you really feel that when you see decisions being made around you that affect you and your family, and you don't have a say yet. So as soon as I could do so, you know, I tried to get involved as much as I could. So been on town meeting since 2018, up for re-election again this year, as we all are. Every single one of us. And the other things that I got involved in were our school. So when we were at Lilja Elementary School, I ran for school council, which was a really interesting opportunity to see how a school runs from the inside out, and to be able to sit with the principal and the teacher representatives on school council, as well as other parents. During that time I was on school council, Natick was going through the profile of a graduate work. So we actually did work on all the school councils, gathering parent level information and seeing the teacher level information and contributions to what they felt should be in profile of a graduate. And that was a really interesting and informative process to see that kind of truly district-wide encompassed everybody whose families or whose professional lives touched schools, developing the profile of a graduate work. We have a daughter who has special needs. So I also joined our special education parent advisory committee, and that was really important as well, because that was a place to really find community of other families who, not only had kids with special needs, but perhaps didn't have the same types of resources that, my family has access to. We're able to provide our daughter with tutoring when she needs it. So we're really very lucky that way. But we met lots of parents who came to us with concerns about their children and didn't have access to those same resources. So to be able to help parents kind of navigate what can be kind of a very confusing and at times feels like it's inaccessible, not at the Natick level, but at just the overall, level of trying to access special education services, was really rewarding, to be able to provide that and give that back to other parents. Other things that I've done in my professional life, I've been a mentor for the Healthcare Business Women's Association. And that work, I think, was really important to me, because I think you learn as much when you're a mentor as you are when you're being mentored. And so to be able to do that, right, Cathi? I mean, it's true.
Yeah.
You go through that same process, whether you're trying to help somebody else sort through, some conflict or a roadblock in their life or in their professional career. You kind of go through that process for yourself over again. And I find that sort of refreshing aspect of, helping people and letting that work that you're doing for them make you reflect on what you're doing as well, is also, something that's been really valuable to me. Yeah, I was the first person in my family to go to college. My father actually only had a 6th grade education. He was an immigrant from Norway, went to Canada originally because he wanted to make enough money to go back and buy a farm, and just never left because he loved Canada and North America. My mom put herself through college. Once she was a nurse. She did that was back in the days when you did nurses training at a hospital. You didn't go to university to become a nurse. And then when she was working full time, she put herself through college at night. So I was the first person who ever had the expectation that I was going to graduate from high school and go straight to college. And that was, honestly, it was a really confusing process, because if you haven't had a family member who's done that, it feels very inaccessible and it feels very foreign. So I feel like I bring that mindset that not everybody approaches school and higher education and the outcome of higher education in the same way, with either the same experience or the same expectations. And I think that that's something that Natick, does a nice job of, is, providing a place for all students and all learners to come and have their own journey. The reason I want to be on school committee is that it's obviously a very important role. School committee sets educational expectations, sets goals that they ask the superintendent to develop into a strategic plan. They oversee more than half of the money that we spend as taxpayers in this town. And they hire the superintendent when necessary, right? So really important job. I started following school committee as soon as my kids were in school. And, I think Julie McDonough has spoken about how she first came to school committee concerned about, enrollment. And I was sitting in the audience at some of those meetings where she came and did public speak and had done some really nice analysis of, these high kindergarten enrollments and could they do something about it. And so that sort of model of being able to come as a parent and speak with a concern and then learn more about the process and eventually want to be part of the process, I think is something that, I saw Julie model for me. And I feel like this is something that I'm really excited about doing and contributing and giving back to our schools. So that's me and what motivates me.
Terrific. Thank you for that as well. Great. And Rick is modeling what I'm hoping people can do is when they do want to ask questions, if you can use the raise hand, it makes it easier for me to at least see kind of who's up next. So Rick, you take yourself off mute and ask.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both for coming and for your service. And it's impressive. I darkened my screen for a reason, which is not that I won't reveal who I am or share my email, but I'm going to pretend to be a neighbor of mine who, when we moved here a few years ago, told me a story. She's a woman of color, and she said that they had moved from London to Natick, and she said that the racism was terrible in London, which was news to me. And she is the mother of 2 preschool children. Now, you're obviously talking to a somewhat mature and white audience here. So I darkened my screen to ask you both to pretend to have a conversation with me as a mother of 2 preschool children about how the schools in here can welcome me in a community which is roughly 90% white.
It's a great question. And I assume that's to both Cathi and
It
Elise.
is. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Either one can go first.
I'll start. I'm never afraid to, well, occasionally I'm afraid to jump in the pool, but not often. Welcome to Natick. We're really happy that you came and chose Natick to live in. It is, as you noticed, a predominantly white district. It's interesting, though, that the students in the district speak over, I believe we're up to over 70 languages. So there are speakers of various languages. Many of them come to school without knowing English. So there's, challenges that people experience in both directions. Natick is committed to becoming a more diverse school system. We don't control who lives in the community, but we're committed to making it a more just and equitable situation for all of our students and our faculty and staff. So we've got recruiting programs to get more teachers and administrators of color and other marginalized groups in and keep them. Oddly enough, one of the things that we have to deal with, and we're talking with the Board of Selectmen, is that last mile. We have candidates who will come out of Boston, for example, and they don't drive because they never needed to know how. So they can take the train, but we can't get them from the train to the school and back again. We're working on that process. We've expanded our recruiting approach, although COVID got in the way a little bit. We are scheduled to hire a director of social emotional learning and equity in the coming year to coordinate work like this. But that doesn't mean that the equity all goes to this one individual. Equity is something that shows up in every administrator's evaluation. We are committed to this. There may be some bumps in the road. I hope that you explain them and address them with the appropriate school person, school individual, probably the principal, but we're very happy that you're here. So thank you for coming and thank you for choosing Natick.
Thank you, Kathy. Good answer. Elise?
Yeah, so I'm going to speak from my perspective of having been at Lilja, which is an elementary school, and assuming this person is my neighbor, and welcome to the neighborhood, and hope you'll be here for our block party in August. It's a good one. But Lilja. So Lilja is a welcoming school. I have always felt that that Lilja does a good job about seeing kids for who they are. And even though there are not very many children of color in Lilja at all, your kids will definitely feel that they are probably the only I guess they're not African-American, but the only Black children in the school. The teachers are going to do a really good job of not trying to, make your kids feel like they need to assimilate. They're going to honor your kids for who they are and what their heritage is. I definitely have seen that. My children come home and they, there's none of this, we're all colorblind here at Lilja. It's, we honor who people are. So my children know that there are children who are, come from a different ethnic background, come from different countries, speak different languages, and they see that as an important part of who their friends and peers are. And I think that speaks a lot to the way that, Natick educators and administrators handle having, largely majority white schools and classrooms, is that they really do take the time and put the effort in to ensuring that we are treating students as individuals and, welcoming them from that perspective. As Kathy said, I'm sure there's going to be bumps along the road. Things are definitely not perfect. But I feel strongly that, when you bring issues forward to administrators and to teachers, that they're dealt with, and they're dealt with promptly and with a great deal of respect. So, and I'm here for you as your neighbor. And if you have any issues, I hope that you would share that with me, and I would be happy to help you in any way that is necessary in order to be heard by, school administration to make sure your kids get what they need.
Great. Thank you. Martin, I see you got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to move into a topic that's been fairly controversial, but hopefully we're all working together moving forward, which is, we went through the decision to close the Johnson School, and I don't want to rehash that because I don't think it's necessary. But moving forward, what do you see for, kind of reallocating that district into other districts? And then maybe talk about I keep hearing that we are going to move forward to renovating the memorial school. So in terms of our future facilities, how do you see your role in that?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. This is one of, a topic that's very important to me. I would like to see, a real vision developed for what the next decade or 2 decades of elementary education could look like in Natick. Johnson is a school that closed, and those students will find new homes at the other elementary schools in town. And all of those schools are great schools. But, we have 3 other aging school buildings that have some of the same problems that Johnson does, and some of the same problems that Memorial does in terms of age and lack of, modern amenities. So even if we are proposing to rebuild one school, I feel like that really does need to be part of a larger plan to address these aging buildings across town. And, to think about the enrollment changes that we see coming our way. There's a very nice presentation made at a school committee meeting a couple of weeks ago, by the McKibben group, and, just an informational group about how the census data is predicting that enrollment overall is going to drop in schools in Natick in the years to come, and that there's really not much that can be done to change that. It's just going to happen. So with that in mind, it feels like we have some breathing room to be less reactive to some of the pressures we've had in previous years with high enrollment, where we've really had to respond to that and provide spaces for students to learn, and to rethink that, and to see, what do we want to do with all our buildings? What do we want elementary education to look like? What grades do we want to have in buildings? One thing I've heard from many parents is this discomfort with having 5th grade in the middle school setting. Is enrollment going to change so much that we might be able to find a way to have 5th grade brought back into an elementary setting, which is more of the standard across the state? So that's the work that I would like to see school committee do. And I think that they can do it by asking for, that long-term strategic planning piece. And I know that our superintendent has some really great ideas about what she'd like to do with preschool and early childhood education. And I'd like to see those ideas worked up into, a real plan that could be, weighed in on by constituents across town, and that we could really look forward to building something over the next, coming decades with respect to elementary education.
Thank you for that. Kathy, do you have anything you want to add to this too?
Yes, it was a very difficult decision, and it was a very heartbreaking decision for many. And for that, we're really sorry, or I'm really sorry. But I can tell you that the school committee has been, and the school district has been getting very positive feedback from the families that have been, like the kindergarten families who won't be going to Johnson next year. Dr. Nolan sat with each family that wanted to and talked to them about what was best for their family and gave them options. And we've gotten very positive feedback about the support for the transition for at least, well, I guess it's not a transition if you've never been in school, but moving the upcoming kindergarteners to other places. One of the interesting things Elise talked about, enrollment, the kindergarten class at Johnson was only predicted to be 15 kids. So one of those kindergarten classes wouldn't have happened anyway, regardless of whether we had kindergarten there or not. But I'm committed to the smooth transition of all students. Some students are going to matriculate out, go to middle school, because we're not closing it immediately. Others will be moved eventually. And the idea is that there's a guidance counselor dealing only with the Johnson kids to make sure that the emotional part is dealt with, and dealt with promptly as these kids move to different schools and try and acclimate there. As far as the MSBA project, the school committee has voted to direct the administration to submit what's called a statement of interest to the MSBA. Actually, the school department does not submit it for the town. The select board submits it. The idea being that Memorial was built, I think the first class was in 68, maybe. I'm a little fuzzy on the dates, but it was in that period. And it needs a lot of work, irrespective of whether it needs to be bigger or different. The roof, the building facade, the heating systems, the electrical systems, the safety systems, they're all at or approaching the end of life. So it's going to need some work. And we're approaching MSBA for that reason. And MSBA will help. They will do enrollment studies. They will do, is this the best place? Is this the best school? They will look at all of our schools and give us feedback. Meanwhile, the facilities department has been going around to all of the schools and creating a plan to maintain them as we go forward, and identifying areas where we will have an issue. Enrollment, I don't play that game. Enrollment is as they come into the school. Predicting it is kind of, it's like playing the lottery. Everybody wants to play, but very few actually get the number right. But mostly, the idea is that we have put in social emotional support into our system for all students. In fact, we broke out social emotional learning and framework for healthy living is one of our goals in the strategic plan. Breaking barriers so that all families and students feel seen and heard. And then Johnson case, that's equally true, is another goal in our strategic plan. The plan is developed every 5 years and updated every year. And as we go forward, we will deal with some of these things and add them as goals and hold the superintendent responsible for them. You know, we have gone to a K-4 approach. We are expanding preschool this year to get the young ones and help parents who need someplace for their child to go. I don't personally see, but it's not saying we wouldn't look at it because I believe MSBA considers it. I don't see moving back back to the K-4 schools. But when we built Kennedy, for example, 5th and 6th grades are in their own wing. They have their own cafeteria. So it's almost like an academy where they're in one place, and the 7th and 8th graders who are markedly larger. And, you know, as a 5th grader, I would have shied away from deciding I wanted the 8th grade seat at cafeteria. Those problems don't occur because they're in different places. So we do go forward. Dr. Nolan is constantly bringing plans or thoughts or ideas to the school committee for, you know, of different ways to do things. You know, so, and it will continue, and I would love to be a part of that as we go forward.
Great. Thanks, Cathi. Pat, I see you've got your hand up. I got to come off mute.
A couple of different questions for you, Cathi, and then even some of the Donna, if she's here too, incumbents. I've been really impressed with the school committee having to make the hard choices that you've had over the last few years, and great building improvements that have happened. I mean, it's cost taxpayer dollars, but it's a fantastic thing. I've been a native for 50 some years, and I'm really impressed with Anna and all of it. A quick question about this latest anti-Semitic and racist graffiti at the high school. Did the school committee come out on with a statement about that? And just wondering what school department and school board and administrators are doing about these, you know, unfortunate incidents that occur sometimes.
The administration from the principal up through the superintendent were involved immediately as soon as they were notified. The school committee has not come out with a statement. We have not met since these incidents happened.
Okay. Yeah.
And we can only function as a body. We can't function as individuals. I can tell you that as part of the policy work that I've been doing, we are working on policies that involve anti-bias, microaggressions, anti-hate, that will give the school department more options, because we're going to try and, although it may not happen immediately, put in restorative justice process so that the only option isn't the police anymore. But there have been what we used to call assemblies. There was a scheduled equity professional development for faculty on one of those days. And I believe it's next week, the high school, they do an equity program that's student run to get at some of these issues. So it's getting addressed in a lot of different ways. It's something that, you know, when it happens, Anna is right there because that's what it is. We do policy, Anna does management, and we try and stay in our own sandbox, which is very important. But we are trying to approach it in many different ways. Another way that we're, trying to break some of the barriers, the policy committee is working on a homework and holiday schedule to recognize more than just the Christian Judeo holidays that are recognized in our school calendar now. And hopefully that will bring, an opportunity for people to share their backgrounds and come together.
Thank you for that. Rather than having Donna, I'm very interested in what you would have to say, but where there's a forum for candidates, Elise, can I ask you, would you like to speak to this either? Not so much the specific incident per se, but just kind of the overall condition.
Yeah, again, I think, I was happy to see that there was a statement made right away about that and an email sent out to, district-wide families. I think that was really important. Everyone needs to know that these things are happening. I think it's a really difficult time right now. I think that there's a lot of struggle going on as we come out of this COVID pandemic recovery and some of the, situations that have always occurred with people, hopefully small segments of our school population where people are bringing ideas that don't belong in a school setting and sharing them in a way that's not appropriate and making racist or other defamatory statements, that perhaps is exacerbated right now. It certainly seems to be. I'm thrilled to hear from Cathi that there's thought of introducing a restorative justice program. One of my daughters is at a charter school in Framingham, and they use restorative justice. And although it's an incredibly time-intensive process, it's so worthwhile, to go through that type of deep examination of issues and, really involving the students, at every moment of the process. So I'm thrilled to hear that. I think that is definitely going in the right direction. Yeah, I think that there's a lot going on that we probably don't even know what's going on, at every school, from elementary to high school. So when these things happen, I feel like we should hear about them. We should hear about more of them.
There is
so that
a
we
lot
can
of
all have those
dysregulation.
conversations.
My apologies. There is a lot of dysregulation right now where kids don't quite know how to be in school.
Mhm.
But
Not that there's ever an excuse for making.
no,
a
I'm not
racist statement,
excusing it at all.
But I think that the whole situation is exacerbated, and there's likely
Mhm.
more of that happening in school than we might normally see or hear about.
Good. Lisa, I see you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I just have actually a question. I think, Elise, I just probably more for you because it was on something you had said during the forum, and I was hoping you could clarify it a little more.
Mhm.
In your closing statement, you mentioned how you thought there needed to be improvements in communication and transparency, but yet, and maybe I missed it, so I apologize, but you never mentioned what you thought the issues were and how you would improve on them. Because, I know they're kind of really big things, but I'd really like to know where you think those issues lie within the current school committee and what you would do to improve them.
Right. So at the forum, I was speaking to two issues. So both, sort of intra-school committee communication. And, I'm not on school committee. So obviously I don't have an insider's view about what conflicts or interpersonal, relations may be contributing to this. But as a viewer of school committee, there's been a lot of, publicly shared discord amongst school committee, a lot of frankly disrespectful statements made from one school committee member to another. So I feel like, the temperature needs to be turned down a bit in these public school committee meetings where the public are holding our school committee to the same standards that we're holding our students to in terms of, respectful discourse, showing of kindness, giving each other's grace, allowing each other to make mistakes. So I think that, as a member of school committee, I would bring that approach with me. In my professional life, I lead teams of, cross-functional teams of, people from all aspects of different parts of scientific research. And there's often a lot of differences of opinions of how we do things. And even though, conversations can get heated about the issues, we're able to remain respectful and kind in those meetings. So I feel like I can bring some of that knowledge about, how to run meetings and be a contributor within that type of situation, that no matter how much external pressure you're feeling, we can bring our best selves to the meeting, and interact in a way that we can later be really proud of. So that's one part of it. The other part is in terms of how school committee communicates some of the aspects of the strategic plan. And I think it's wonderful that we have a strategic plan, and and essential that we have one. And Cathi has spoken to some of the improvements that have been made in the budgeting process, and I see those improvements. But I still think that there's more that could be done there to really connect the line item amounts in the budget back to the goals in the strategic plan, so that it's really clear to the public, not just the school committee members, because I think that there's more there kind of to be understood, but so the public can see, okay, we're increasing spending here, and that's because we have this goal to do X, Y, or Z, and that's going to help move us forward on our goal in this time frame or with these outcomes, and have some expectations for what the outcome of the action taken by the budget based on the strategy and the strategic plan would be. So that is another aspect that I think that there could be more there. And I think that some of the ways to do that are, we always think about the budget during budget season when the school committee and finance committee and town administration is under a lot of pressure and under a timeline to deliver a budget so it can be approved at Springtown meeting. So that's not the time to try to make any improvements in how to change communication around the budget, because you're already in the thick of it. And I think school committee could take some time outside of that process over the summer when they use some of their retreat format type meetings to have more informal discussions and really think about, how did it go with communication? Where did we have some, pain points in terms of having the public understand why, the school district wanted to spend money in this way? How could we improve that for next year? So that's the type of activities that I think that school committee could engage in outside of these really high pressure times in which delivery is the #1 priority. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you for that. This also, both of the topics you addressed seem kind of ripe for talking about kind of the insider outsider view. I'd like to offer Cathi the opportunity to just respond to either of those topics.
Thank you. To Elise's last point about tying the strategic plan to the budget, in the last budget presentation and before the public hearing, there was a slide that explicitly did that. We're adding this teacher for this reason. We're adding this program for that reason. Anybody who's interested in the strategic plan can find it on the front page of the Natick website at natickps.org. You can also find there the Transparency Center, which includes all the budgets going back to 2019. It includes all the questions that FinCom has been asked and been answered, and members have asked and answered since I think 2016. But there is an entire Transparency Center on the front page of the website, towards the bottom, but it's still on the front page. just for people to know if they're interested in looking at it. As far as the communication issue, oh, and the last thing on the budget is our chart of accounts in Munis does not line up exactly with the reports that are needed to return to DESI. We're working on it. We've been working with town administration and the finance department for several years. It's slow because the prior comptroller didn't think there needed to be a change. But we're getting there, and we're getting hopefully to a point where the budget says this account, this much in money. I'm not sure it's that useful for the public to know that we spend, X amount of dollars buying paper, but that's what we're trying to get to eventually, but we need help from the town side. So for the communication thing, I think we've vastly improved the public communication. The inter-committee communication has been fractious lately. I would be interested to know what Elise thinks should have been said by Dr. Fuchsman in that situation, because it was a case of this was not the first time that things were misstated. And it wasn't the first time that things were misstated on this topic. And so I'm not sure, since private communications haven't worked, I'm not sure, we were not at our finest that moment, I will grant that. And the use of the word lying, is a trigger word, but I'm not sure what Dr. Fuchsman or any of our committee members should have said to point out that things were being mischaracterized. And I still struggle with that 2 weeks later.
Thanks.
Can I just clarify that I wasn't referring to a specific meeting or a specific person. I never mentioned
No,
anyone.
I
right?
understand that, but
Right, I was talking of communication in the whole over the past several months. So just want to be really clear, not intending to call anyone out.
Thanks. Catherine, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I have a question, but now I'm feeling what I'm feeling just from the previous conversation. And I want to say, I have attended every school committee meeting for the past year, but I missed the first one back in August because I was rusty. And, I'm aligned with what Cathi just expressed, because it's been tough. And so I don't want to get more into it, but it's been very stressful from the point of view of someone watching, and the dynamics are not healthy, but it's a two-way street. So anyway, my question stems from yesterday. I took 90 minutes and I watched, after the fact, the Memorial Principal Search Forum. And there were 2 stellar final candidates. And of course, the principal had already been chosen and announced, but I really wanted to watch and hear the conversation. And I was completely blown away by the person who was just appointed principal of Memorial School, Troy Holding. Every category I could have come up with, he exceeded my expectations. He exudes warmth and integrity and transparency and authenticity. And really, if I could enroll as a student in that school, I would for September, because I want to be around that man. And I am so happy that Natick selected him. He did state openly that he's a gay man. So, it's diversity hiring. I don't think that's why he was selected. But one of the things that struck me is he was talking about his relationships with the people in the building. And yes, he is the boss of the school, but he comes from a teacher background, and especially in terms of how he will engage with teachers and does. He loves to go into the classroom, but it's not to examine and criticize, it's to be a support. And I love that. I just think they will all be so lucky to have him, especially given the transition from Johnson. But what I'd like to know is, so the school committee evaluates Dr. Nolan, the superintendent. That's one of the functions. I would like to know what each of you, Cathi and Elise, will do to overtly, oh, sorry. Hold on. Yeah, I'm so embarrassed. No one ever calls me on this phone. I only use my
Timing was
landline at
perfect.
home, of course. So sorry. I want to know how you will. So I think that it's great to be responsible for evaluating Dr. Nolan, but I have not been feeling that she's been 100% supported. And I think that's really important to me. There's a 7-member committee, and I would like to know how you all will support Dr. Nolan, not only evaluate her and let her know overtly that you are supporting her, and really how you will do that, because that's really important to me. I think we have a superb superintendent. She is highly regarded as perhaps the most skilled superintendent in New England. And I want to keep her here. That's really important to me. So please, if you could speak to that, because just take a page from Troy Holdings' playbook as administrator, as principal, and let me know what you will do, not only to evaluate her and assess her, but to support her and to let me know that you were doing that.
I think I'm up first this time.
Sure, yeah.
You're right, it is very important, and I would do almost anything to hold on to Dr. Nolan as superintendent. But I think there are a couple of things that you touched on, so let me see if I can answer it. Yes, we are responsible for evaluating the superintendent. Each year we set out a set of goals. At the end of the school year, Dr. Nolan presents us with evidence of accomplishing those goals, and we do our evaluation. We do it in a collaborative way as a group. It is the school committee's evaluation. It's not a school committee member's evaluation. In terms of supporting her going forward, I think there are a couple of things. I've been concerned that Dr. Nolan hasn't had enough time to engage in visioning, which she is extremely good at. So there are a couple of things that the school committee can do. One is we can stay in our own sandbox. And by that, I mean not trying to engage on management issues and ask questions about, well, why did you choose this way versus that way? The second is we have to trust Dr. Nolan. We hired her, we pay her, she informs us. I'm not an educator. Well, I taught at the college level, but that's very different. When the administration is saying this is the way to go, I believe we need to trust that this is the way to go. If it turns out it's not, then it shows up in the evaluation and we find a new superintendent. I haven't encountered that yet. I have encountered issues like that with prior superintendents, but not with Dr. Nolan. I think, as I said, I worry about her time. Dr. Nolan used to be in the classrooms, in the schools all the time. And at this point, she just does not have the bandwidth to do that. We just finished building Kennedy, which will free her up a little bit. But we, the school committee, need to stay in our lane, ask the questions and only the questions we need to make the decisions we're being asked to make, and hence stop asking the, well, I'm just curious kinds of questions. You know, she's mentioned a recent school committee meeting rather, that she received 15 pages of questions. Most of them were not related to the decision we were being asked to make. Having to answer things like that, or in that great amount, takes time. It takes up all administration time, so people aren't doing what we really want them to do. And quite honestly, I find it disrespectful to then say, well, my question wasn't answered when it is there. So those are the kinds of things we need to be. If we stay in our lane and let her do her job, she is so good at it that this school system will thrive. I'm not saying we don't monitor, but people look at collaboration, and the word collaboration is some dirty word these days. You can both collaborate and evaluate. They're very different. As an auditor, I was very collaborative with the departments in the bank. but I evaluated them and wrote a report. So, you know, I might find this department didn't do X, Y, and Z, and yet I have a good relationship with the people in the department. That's what we need to go to. That's where we need to get back to. We can do both. It's not an either or situation. Thanks.
Thanks, Kathy. Elise, you want to speak to
Yeah,
it?
absolutely. So I think the best way to support Dr. Nolan is to give her a school committee that supports her. And how do they support her? You know, there was recently a retreat where there was, somebody from the Massachusetts Association of School Committee who came and talked about the role of, school committee versus the administration. And it was a Venn diagram, and it really struck me. I wrote it down because in the center of that Venn diagram was, trust and respect. You each have your own roles. School committee is strategic, administration is operational. And in order to work well together, you have to build trust and respect. And I think that, showing respect for a superintendent, and as Kathy said, a superintendent who is, has so much on her plate and has every minute of her day scheduled, showing respect for her is to have meetings that run on time so that she is, spending her time in meetings effectively and productively, and not having to sit through meetings where the substance of the meeting could have happened in 30 minutes, but in 4 hours later, there's still no vote taken. So I think, trying to get school committee meetings back to functioning in that sort of efficient, productive, priority-based way, it goes a long way to showing respect to Dr. Nolan and her time and her administration's time, who also attend the meetings. The assistant superintendents attend these meetings as well. I think, pushing her a little bit, right? Dr. Nolan is a talented administrator, and talented people want to be challenged. They don't want to be, just applauded and told how wonderful they are. They want to be developed. They want to be challenged. They want to grow in their role and in their profession. And I think that a strong school committee can do that, by providing, feedback, by making suggestions about, and don't have any specifics because I'm not part of this process, but, finding a place where they think she could really expand her skill set and encouraging her to spend some of her time doing that, just as we all would like from our managers and supervisors. Somebody having school committees show an interest in developing her as opposed to just retaining her because we need her so badly. I don't think that that is necessarily the most respectful stance to take. Treat her as the professional she is and as the talented administrator she is, and give her the resources she needs. Be the school committee that will truly allow her to develop and realize her own dreams and aspirations for her professional career, because Dr. Nolan's success will be Natick's success. So we owe it to her to do that.
Could I
Great.
just add something there?
Yeah, sure. Go quick.
Unfortunately, Dr. Nolan has developed new skill sets in the last few years that no superintendent really needs. We didn't have a facilities manager for quite some time, so she was managing all of the school facilities. We have had COVID for the last 2 years. She's become very, very adept and creative at figuring out how to use somebody else's money before our money. So she's become very financially oriented in that situation. Use a grant, use somebody else's money before Natick taxpayer money. So she has been developing, but in this time of COVID, it's been very, very difficult. And as Elise said, if you looked at her schedule, you would cry. Like every 15 minutes is scheduled for something. And respect and doing your homework before the meeting is key. And I would like to get back to that as well, where all members come prepared. And so it limits questions, but it also, we need to limit the, well, I agree with Billy kind of talking that just takes up time. And if you're a town meeting member, you know what I'm talking about.
Thank you for that. So I see Lindsay has her hand raised, but before I take that question, I just want to be mindful. We're at the top of the hour, and folks may want to move on to other things. So I guess what I'll propose is after Lindsay asks her question and we get the responses to that, if Cathi or Elise also want to just kind of make any concluding, remarks, that would be great. I'd like to remind folks, anyone who would like to share their email address with the candidates, please do so in the chat. That'd be particularly useful for those of you that have asked questions as well, in case Cathi or Elise want to follow up further. And then just a quick reminder, next week we will have, I believe, all three remaining candidates, Henry and Julie and Kate, speaking to us as well. So I want to take this opportunity to thank both Cathi and Elise for coming. This has been super useful and popular. You may be interested to know that this looks to be the largest attendance at a Coffee with a Purpose session, at least since we reconstituted this year. So thank you for that. So with all of that, Lindsay, thank you for being so patient. What's your question?
Can you hear me? Sorry, I'm doing this remotely, so I apologize.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Excellent. So I guess my question is this, kind of even during this conversation, I agree that this has been a very, difficult and trying time recently. But I don't always hear my voice represented in the school committee meetings. And I am interested in this whole idea of questioning as being a problem. And I understand being respectful of Dr. Nolan's time. I understand being respectful of the committee's time. I understand coming prepared. But I just find this notion that, and unfortunately, I've experienced it being in different town organizations throughout my career, both as a parent, as a volunteer, and as in my job, that for some reason, this whole idea of when you question something that's happened, that it's wrong. And so I just kind of would really like both candidates to kind of speak to me about this idea of, I agree that we want Dr. Nolan to become the best superintendent that we can, and that kind of pushing is an important part. And so I just kind of want to understand that more from both candidates.
Elise, you want me to start?
Sure. Did you go first last time? Whose turn is it?
I don't actually.
Yeah,
it's
actually,
your turn.
it would be Elise's turn.
Yeah, I don't mind.
Good point.
I'd be happy to go first. Yeah, so Lindsay, and I think Lindsay, someone in the chat asked you to share your last name as well. I know who you are, but yeah. So in terms of asking questions, I mean, everyone has a right to ask questions. A member of the public has rights to ask questions. School committee members have rights. And there's definitely a finite amount of time that school administrators have to answer questions. So I think that, school committee needs to work really hard to uphold their own standard. I mean, I've been reading the school committee policy manual, and on the very first couple of pages, it outlines, both the legal responsibilities of the school committee, but also school committee's own definition of how they will execute those responsibilities. And they say, it says right in the policy manual, that we will robustly engage in two-way conversation with constituents, which is all of Natick. So I think that is something that school committee has a responsibility to do, and can do that without any burden on the administration, to get robust public engagement and feedback on topics, and collate that and present that as, a piece of information to the administration. I don't think that every single question that comes to school committee needs to be answered by an administrator, right? Some questions come to school committee and they can be answered by school committee. You know, I don't know how to answer the question, you know, or to deal with this idea that sometimes there are too many questions made of administrators, you know, having not seen what those questions are. I don't know. But I do think that if people are continuing to answer questions, it's usually because they still have questions. You know, there's something that's not understood. So if there are other ways of getting people information or working with people within school committee to help orient them to information and materials, you know, I think that that's something that you could explore. I hope that, you know, should I be a new school committee member, that the other 6 people on the committee will welcome my questions and want to help me get up to speed. I think I would feel that way, someone joining my committee. You know, in terms of there potentially being some lack of clarity about certain things that questions are being asked about, like, for example, the budget. You know, Cathy's talked about improvements that have been made in the budget document. Well, that's because there was a lack of understanding and clarity. So perhaps more understanding or more clarity and more refining of how some information is presented could be helpful. You know, if information that the school committee is asking the administration to present then gets a lot of questions, you know, maybe school committee could work with the administration to help them present it in a way that they know will be more digestible by the public and save the administration time, you know, by helping them, guide them to presenting information. So I hear you, Lindsay. You know, I think that, you know, being on the member of the public side, it's hard to understand and see sometimes how information from the public is funneled through school committee and how that is really, you know, worked with and considered. So I hope that there's some room to make that just more visible in future iterations of the school committee.
Thank you for that, Elise. Cathy, you want to add? Or?
Sure. First, I apologize if I made it seem like I don't value questions. I absolutely value questions. As an auditor, I made my life asking questions. That was my job. My concern is that questions are being asked about things that are not within the school committee purview. And that's where we have a line that we shouldn't cross. We should not get into administration and management and operations of the school department. We need to stay in our lane. And that's where questions, I have difficulty with answering questions that are not, they're not related to the decision that we need to make, and they're not within our purview to change. They're not policy, they're not budget, they're not strategic plan. Those are the questions that school committee should be asking. Also, at every school committee meeting, we have a public speak at the beginning where people can ask questions that aren't about items that aren't on the agenda. Unfortunately, due to state law, we can't answer those questions at that time because that would be considered breaking open meeting law because it wasn't posted. But public is, there's always public input on every item on the budget, I mean, on the agenda. And those questions, when someone asks a question, those questions get answered. So I value questions. I think questions are, they're like the lifeblood. I would just like to see that questions from the committee be restricted to what's in our purview. And if that happens, it will also provide more opportunity or more time for the public to ask questions. There won't be any, you know, well, we're going to only do this for 5 minutes because we need to move on. There will be more time. And so I apologize if that was the impression that I left. It's not the questions, it's the topics and areas of the questions. And people ask hard questions, and I'm fine with that. And sometimes you ask the hard question, everybody says, that's perfect. That's you're doing your job. As I say, my problem is when the questions veer into management operations, which is not the school committee's purview. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. I would just add as a personal observation, I think sometimes people ask questions that aren't questions, they're statements. And, you know, that sometimes I think becomes the role of the chair to try to, you know, curtail
Control
that
that.
to some extent. So in terms of closing statements, I know Marissa has her hand up and she's been kind enough. She said she had two questions. The first one is to Elise as a challenger, which she's put in the chat, as a challenger to incumbents. What do you see as the main problem you're particularly qualified to fix, and how? Maybe you could try to respond to that, as well as just kind of make any concluding comments you'd like. Marissa, if you want to put in your second question in the chat as well. I don't know whether it's to Cathi in particular or both candidates, but and then we'll give Cathi a chance to speak as well. So Elise?
Sure. Yeah, no. Thank you, Marissa, for that question. So I see the skill set that I would bring to school committee that would be particularly helpful as the following. I'm a scientist. I'm used to you know, dealing with data and using it to answer complex questions. So questions that might take months or years to you know, to develop a project, to test a theory, to answer a question, you know, to build something. So I'm used to taking that long view of things and understanding that in many times it's, you know, it's a marathon, not a sprint in terms to make effective change. So I bring that sort of patient outlook and the ability to move projects forward productively over time. You know, I think my communication skills are really strong. You know, I've got a lot of experience in dealing with conflict resolution, in building highly effective teams. This is something that I'm, you know, recognized for within my professional life. And I feel like I could bring those skills happily and donate them to Natick, and to help rebuild some of this, you know, working together that needs to happen within school committee, and, you know, hopefully getting people to hear each other and to be, you know, active listeners and effective listeners. So those are the skills that I think would be particularly helpful at this time. In terms of just giving a couple of summary statements, that's kind of who I am. You know, scientist, longtime volunteer, committed Natick citizen. You know, feel really strongly that school committee is something that I would like to be involved in and can, you know, contribute towards. I feel a really strong obligation towards the public at large in ensuring that, you know, we're building, you know, having community-wide conversations and making changes based on community-wide conversations, and understanding that those take time and won't happen necessarily right away. We haven't talked a lot about it, a little bit, but I do think that the after effects we're feeling or from the pandemic and from all the disrupted learning that we had really does need to be our top priority. Despite some of the other things we've talked about, we really need to get back to that, you know, tight-knit learning community that we had in Natick prior to the pandemic disruptions. And I would like to see a lot of effort and resources be put towards, you know, ensuring that we are, you know, supporting our teachers and administrators and educators and families in supporting our learners, all of our students in Natick, to really coming to a place where they feel confident and happy to be in school again. And that's why I would love to earn your vote. And I'd be happy to answer any questions in the chat, and please feel to reach out by email or Facebook. I'm always willing to answer questions and would love to hear what your thoughts are about school committee. So thank you for having me here today. I really appreciate it.
Great, thank you, Elise. Cathi, any concluding comments? There is that one other question of Marissa's in the chat having to do with funneling the fire hose of communications. I don't know whether you want to respond to that or just in general.
I will, but I also want to respond I also want to say to thank Elise, as well as Coffee with a Cause, with a Purpose. You know, without Elise being here, we wouldn't have had this conversation. And I think these conversations are very important. In terms of communication, I mean, the two buzzwords that I hear as I talk to people are communication and transparency. The problem with school committee communication is the committee can only act as a body. Sorry, there's a phone in my house here, but I'm dog sitting and I don't know how to turn it off.
That's all right.
So I apologize. God, that is annoying.
Technology gets the better of us sometimes.
At
There
least
you
I needed the bringer.
go. Yeah.
So the school committee can only act as a body. That's the only way we have authority for anything. We can't act as individuals. And then the administration has their communication. They do weekly blast more often than a week if something happens. And that's the administration's communication. The school committee has not generally put out, I mean, occasionally we'll put out statements, but it's not a norm of ours or a practice of ours to do that. One of the problems with, so I don't know where we're not communicating, but there is an issue of when individuals speak, they're recognized as school committee members, and they may say something that's not in alignment with what the full committee feels. And that's an issue. And transparency, I'm not sure how we can be more transparent. I really don't. We've made, the budget is much more easy to read. We're still working on it. I get it, but it doesn't mean we're not being transparent. If you go to the Natick Public Schools website at natickps.org and look at the bottom of the page, there is a transparency center that has been developed to try to answer questions. The budget is there. The strategic plan is there. All of the things that people say, well, I'd like to know more about, it's there. You just need a little initiative to go look at it. You always can reach out to a school committee member. If you email schoolcommittee@natickps.org, it goes to all of us, but it will be answered by the chair. So I hear those words, I don't quite understand them because I don't know where we're falling down. As far as closing statements, I think I've offered and done a lot for this town and performed very well over a lot of years. I've done an amazing amount in my first 3 years as school committee member. Because my schedule is flexible, I'm often the one who volunteers because when no one else does, because I can make the meeting. And that's great. I'm learning a lot. I've learned a lot. I want to continue to both learn and teach as a school committee member, to provide that guidance to the superintendent, to provide that support to the superintendent, and yet still be able to evaluate the superintendent. I want to make our budget and advocate for resources. You know, some people say, well, you just throw everything in the budget. No, there's always a reason that something's in the budget. For example, this year, it seems odd, I'm sure, but we added a partial orchestra position. Now, people would say, is that the most important thing to add to the budget after a crisis? Well, what it does is it allows the middle school schedule to be rejiggered so that there's more what we call response to intervention time, where kids get the resources they need, whether it's OT, PT, reading, math, whatever it is. We've also added a huge number of specialists, math and reading specialists. We've added guidance counselors, we've added social workers, we've added programs, we've expanded the Hey NHS, how are you? It's both at both middle schools, is now down to 7th grade. It's a program, it's run externally. But it's a program meant to identify kids who are in mental health crisis. So we've started, and thankfully we have some grant monies to do this because it would have been extremely expensive for the town. But as I said, Dr. Nolan is working with the town constantly to say, okay, can somebody else, some other grant pay for this service? It's allowed us to prepay, which is legal under Mass General Law, which means our budget request is smaller. So we're doing a lot of really good things. And I think that there needs to be some stability, with all due respect to Elise, who I like. I think there needs to be some stability that allows both the committee and the superintendent and her administration to focus on kids and faculty and not on these other things. So I ask for your vote on March 29th, at least one of them. Well, actually, you can only give me one of them.
Early and often.
Right.
Yeah, you can't vote 3 times for me. I know, Sarah, that that's really what you wanted to do, but I just can't do it.
Early and often.
Right. All right.
Oh,
Well,
and
again,
thank you again for hosting us. It's really been nice.
yeah. And thank you both for coming again. It's been a really useful morning, I think, for all of us. So,
Good.
and hope to see you all again next Monday when we hear from our other 3 candidates as well.
Like we will.
And enjoy the rest of this beautiful
Very
day.
sunny day.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank
Bye
you.
all.
Bye.
Bye all.